On a summer night in 68 BC, under the Temple of Jupiter on the eastern outskirts of the city of Rome, a member of the Senate, Lucius Cornelius Cato, was found dead in his own bath. His skin was flushed with a light greenish gray. His mouth and nose were clean, and his pulse had stopped, as if he had died quietly and painlessly. But in his locker, a loose bottle of perfume powder, a scattered box of powdered incense, the scent carrying a hint of sickening sweetness. What was even stranger was that there was not a single trace of a fight at the scene. Nor was there any fight. The coroner was unable to explain the cause of his death, leaving only a whisper. Perhaps the handiwork of a witch. Have you ever thought that underneath the splendor and order of ancient Rome actually lurked an entirely different system of power? A silent war, not through swords and shields, but incense and shadow. This is not fiction or a myth, but a piece of truth that has been deliberately obscured by history. Powdered incense, today, is a symbol of romance and scent memory. But in Rome too, 0 years ago, it was an instrument of murder, a bait for lust, and even a secret weapon for power deals. And it is not a warrior or a genin who manipulates them, but a group of women called Venefica. They are witches, apothecaries, mistresses, and assassins, and their art is called the art of poison. Today, we will travel through time and space into the shadows of these Roman witches to unravel a secret world of powders and manipulation. How did they concoct erotic spices to make the aristocracy? And how do you take someone's life unnoticed with a whiff of odor? Why did the Senate finally launch a massive manhunt for them? And how is it that the secret arts they left behind can still be traced? Don't blink. You're about to enter a period, dusted off by history, of dark recipes. In an era when the Roman Republic was on its way to its peak, an unseen desire was creeping through the air. It doesn't come from the battlefield, the political arena, or the Colosseum, but is hidden in every whiff of scent, cedar, myrrh, ambergris, mixed with something more ineffable. And the people who made this fragrant powder were not in palaces or temples, but scattered in the deep alleys of the slums and the hidden gardens outside the city walls. They were not pharmacists or spice merchants, but something else. Venefica, meaning poison woman or poisonous. They make powdered incense, but these are not the ordinary balms of the bazaar, but spell spices blended according to the path of the moon and encapsulated according to the astrological moments. Some are mixed with mandala juice, which can make people lose control of their emotions. Some harbor trace amounts of lead white, aconite, and dan sulfur, which can invade the skin and confuse people crongen. More importantly, these powders never appear as poisons. They hide in lovers' kisses, in the corners of a noblewoman's coat, in the air of a party. They are not made to kill, but to control. Why did these witches have such access to the Roman upper class? Because they understood the desires of the Romans. In a society that believed in conquest and glory, noble women wanted to lock up their lovers, politicians wanted to confuse their opponents, and even the wives of certain patriarchs wanted their husbands to go quiet. These witches, instead of reciting prayers in the temple, sprinkle scented powder into the drapery at midnight and, in a whisper, plant a person's fall. They are alchemists, psychological manipulators. As the art of manipulation spreads and the powerful begin to test each other, the meaning of aroma is no longer pleasure, but a code word for danger. How effective is this technique, really? Why can't even the Senate publicly punish it? Is its source really just superstition, or is there a systematic technique, knowledge, and psychological suggestion? Next, we unveil the true story of a witch, a process of refining powder from adoration to murder, a bloody game behind the scent. Leia Servia, a name that should have remained obscure in history, became the most controversial powder witch in the Roman courts after a murder. The case of Leia, which took place in 52 BC, was like a scent bomb detonated in the midst of war drums and conspiracies. Born into a family of spice traders in Port Ostia, Leia grew up familiar with a variety of exotic plants and aromatic substances. As an adult, she moved to Rome and opened a perfumery at the foot of the Palatine Hill, ostensibly to mix scents for noblewomen, but in fact to provide a private service. Her list of patrons even included the wives of certain senators, the mistresses of priests, and one, Lucius Graecunus, then lieutenant of the magistracy, an ambitious young nobleman on the rise. It is said that he fell into a constant state of delirium after taking the kiss of the moon powder that Leia had prepared for him. At first, he was only short-tempered. The official autopsy report could not find any fatal toxin and only mentioned fluid imbalance and brain confusion. which could not be characterized as homicide. At this point, however, Lucius's wife, Evelia, accuses Leia of practicing perfume sorcery with the intention of controlling her husband, and presents a small bottle of balm in court. With a suite, it was rare for a Roman court to hear a case of witchcraft, but this was different. The reason was simple. Lucius was on Pompey's side. Leia shocked the crowd with her defense in court. The men of Rome never admitted to being affected by fragrance, but were often drunk on the incense I mixed. It is not the powder that they fear. The court was in uproar at these words, and what happened afterward was even more chilling. On the very last day of the trial, a young man who worked as a prosecutor's assistant was found dead on bed. Several servants who had testified also mysteriously disappeared. Eventually, Leia was sentenced to banishment for spreading substances with manipulative intent and exiled to the Parthian border. Her store was burned and her recipes confiscated. I have not killed. I have only given them the illusion they crave. For several years after Leia's departure, the Roman spice market shook violently. Noble women began to avoid the use of customized powder, and the Senate even proposed to control the importation of fragrances for fear of regenerating the poison of incense and shadow. But here's the truth. Leia was just a lead-in, one that made the ruling class of Rome realize for the first time there is power, not in the Senate, not in the legions, but in the hands of a hidden incense. Next, we'll uncover the notes and remnants of the incense formula she left behind, and track down a deadly odor that may still be in the recipe today. Leia left behind more than just legends. In the Vatican secret archives, a page of parchment numbered DCLXV13 records a partial recipe for powdered incense, signed LS. Its contents had long been off-limits, reserved for the study. It wasn't until 1972 that it was translated and made public for the first time by a scholar as part of the Vatican's herbology research program. What was written on the paper was not an entire guide. When the moon is full, pick the fat of the red wood, mix the juice of the pale flowers, warm it with the powder of poppy seeds, and supplement it with night dew and 3 drops of lip seal. This seemingly esoteric content has been reduced and analyzed by modern toxicologists to reveal that the following ingredients may be involved: hematoxylin, pale flower juice, suspected belladonna extract containing atropine, poppy seed powder, derived from opium poppy, containing traces of morphine or codeine, night dew, a carrier diluted liquid, lipstick. Whether or not it is a salivary component is still speculative. Combining these ingredients, scientists have given it a new name: shadow powder, meaning powder of shadow. In 1974, the University of Turin, Italy, conducted animal experiments under strict control against this formula. Experimental reports indicate that shadow powder has mild olfactory stimulation and cognitive slowing effects up to 0.02 mg at 0.05 mg, transient hallucinations, mild euphoria, and emotional attach. Some experimental rats showed behavioral disorders or even died. In other words, the powder, in certain doses, not only stimulates the brain to secrete dopamine, but also induces a kind of attachment hallucination, a projection of feelings triggered. We don't know if Leia is well versed in neuroscience, but she clearly knows how people succumb to odor. Dr. Calvisirio, behavioral toxicologist. Even more shocking, the experimenters put a very low dose of shadow powder into the incense burner, and 3 out of 5 participants showed mild mood swings and higher affinity for the source. Is this exactly the effect that Leia and her companions seek? In an age without psychoanalysis or brain imaging technology, the aroma is, perhaps, their most accurate psychological weapon. It's more like a prolonged invasion, slowly softening the will, dismantling defenses, creating emotional resonance, and, ultimately, causing the subject to see the operator as the only trusted person. And when this effect is sustained and repeated on aristocrats, military officers, and MPs, can you imagine what this means politically? Leia was not alone. At least 7 women were recorded as scent witches, and even appeared in the interrogation notes of Caesar's ambassadors. They may have been the real odor assassins of Rome. We follow another, even more destructive recipe. Not for love, but for removal. A powdered murder in a Roman palace. At the height of power, the slightest breeze can be a dagger. On March 16, 37 AD, the Roman Emperor Tiberius Julius Caesar died suddenly in a private palace on the island of Capri. His body was free of trauma and violent reactions. Official records are vague, and the regent, Gaius Caligula, eager to take the throne, announced to the public that the old emperor voluntarily resigned to the gods. But a few years later, a former court escort named Festus, on the run, left a confession to the Senate, revealing a shocking episode. He did not die naturally. That night, someone burned incense, and a long-haired maid sprinkled fragrant powder into the emperor's couch and bedding, and personally wiped his forehead and under his nose. The name of this powder is Pulvis Thanatos, meaning powder of death. According to Festus, it originated from a woman named Sabina Tullia, a former perfumer in the palace's royal kitchen, who was ostensibly a spice consultant but was actually responsible for perfume. She claimed to be a master of divine breath harmonization, and the spices she used, often from India, Egypt, and Nubia, contained a large number of exotic plants that could not be traced. According to modern botanical scholarly reconstructions, these ingredients contain purple poppy seed, Papaver somniferum var, purpurea, a rare poppy variant with strong neuroleptic properties, Lanthus weepia, suspected ephedra extract with central system disrupting effects, Lunaria aurora, now extinct, presumed to contain mildly hallucinogenic ingredients. The odor of the mixture of these materials cannot be fully restored in contemporary times, but according to the surviving archives described, the aroma is like the burning of withered leaves. Tiberius slept peacefully on his last night while burning this very powder. 3 days later, his heart rate had slowed to an unmeasurable level. His skin was ashen, and his temperature was cold. It was a carefully designed odor infiltration that did not alert, did not cause a reaction, and did not even leave any residual trace that could lead to a conviction. There was only one sign. That night, on the emperor's couch, an unusually detailed pattern of ashes was left behind, resembling the ancient Phoenician symbol for the door of the soul. Later, the Senate sealed the confession and recalled Sabina after Caligula took office, and soon after, she accidentally fell into the sea and her body was lost. But the powder of death didn't sink with her. Its formula, in fractured form, appears in several monastic collections, alchemists' transcriptions, AMP, Persian witchcraft scrolls. It wasn't until the 18th century that French perfumer Louis Leblanc attempted to replicate the scent, claiming to have had visions of a golden moon all night long. Have they mastered a non-intrusive and lethal way of making those in power lose control in their sleep? Next, we will turn to the deeper structures and systems of the incense and powder arts. Do these arts, in fact, hide a long-established secret system of mind control? As we reconstruct the formulas of these powders and trace the deadly ingredients, an even more disturbing question emerges. Were these powders merely poisons, or a language of manipulation? The Venefica witches of ancient Rome seem to have long understood one principle. If you want to control a person, you do not have to tie his hands and feet, as long as you capture his desires or sense. Their poison never kills immediately, but induces a tilting of emotions, confusion of judgment, irrational attachment to the practitioner, and even an increase in behavioral compliance. Modern psychology refers to this state as affective suggestibility, APS, and scenting, its earliest material trigger model. In a 2021 study at the University of Leeds in the UK, it was found that certain odors can stimulate the amygdala and nucleus accumbens regions of the human brain, leading to an increase in dopamine. Once an aroma is bound to a certain face, voice, or touch, a person's defense mechanisms are loosened. The Roman powder witch utilizes this mechanism to turn herself into a dependent target without contact or language. We used to think that psychological warfare was a modern product. The CIA's MK Ultra program, Soviet hypnosis training, emotional manipulation on wartime radio. But all of this was silently realized by the female witchcraft community in the form of scented powders, as far back as Rome 20 years ago. And that's just the beginning. According to a 15th century alchemical codex found in Berlin's underground archives, a diagram of a peculiar structure appears in its interior pages, a circular array with a nucleus of will in the center and 7 Latin words around the periphery: desiderium, desire; timor, fear; amor, love; invidia, jealousy; gaudium, pleasure; dolor, mourning; fides, trust. This is not a religious totem, but a complete structural map of emotional manipulation. Pulvis regit cor, perfumed mastery of the human heart, means that perfumery is not a random concoction, but a conscious effort to stimulate a certain combination of emotions to achieve a certain. We have compiled the 3 formulas left over from Leah's case and found that their effects point to love and possession, amor, inducing attachment and pulling attention, and fear and obedience, pleasure and stay. Gaudium gives the option to rather stay with you. Does this explain why so many Roman officials, aristocrats, and even legionary commanders invariably changed sides, gave up power, and fell in love? They were not brainwashed. In the age of modern warfare and information warfare, we think of smell as just part of the background. But in ancient Rome, it was the real lever of control at center stage. The element of odor has also been reintroduced in certain advanced psychological warfare training today, called olfactory preconditioning. They may not realize that the art had a name as Rome, the art of poisonous shadows. It uses shadow as its body and scent as its blade, and surrenders the will without bloodshed. So it's all just an accident of history? Or is it some kind of hidden technology that has been passed down to this day? In the next chapter, we'll return to the mysterious group of Venefica themselves, and whether these powders are simply folkloric sorcery or part of some larger secret system. Earlier in the series, we called the Roman witches who manipulated the powder Venefica, the Latin term of contempt for a woman who uses poisons or spells. But was this really their only identity? There is mounting evidence that Venefica is not a kind of loose folkloric sorcerer, but rather a secret society with a clear organizational structure, an ancient and highly effective hermitage. Camera advances. A copper plate inscription unearthed in the Salerno region of southern Italy, bearing dozens of women's names, with the central inscription, Pulvis Matrone. The discovery of this inscription was a major breakthrough. It is not a record of a deity, nor is it a tombstone, but is more like a membership book. The terminology mentioned in it is closely related: Domina Umbrae, the Lady of Shadows, suspected to be a high-ranking perfumer; Vestalis Fumi, the Lady Keeper of Smoke, possibly the presiding officer of the spice-burning ceremony; Silens Ductrix, silent guides or mind manipulators. These are not marketplace witches, but more like trained experts in sensory psychological warfare. In a study of ancient Greek and Roman priestesses, the University of Jena, Germany, found that these scent witches often had a dual role. They could be healers, midwives, and spice merchants. They are transformed into aura manipulators, who use the powder to open sensory boundaries and cast blessings or curses. Instead of male master gods such as Jupiter and Mars, they worshipped more ancient and repressed female divinities: Hecate, Lilith, and Latona, deities closely associated with the moon, the night. In other words, they use the powder as a psychic medium and manipulation as a sacred practice. Cut to a private letter from 50 BC. In a letter from a noblewoman to her bosom friend, she writes, "I no longer fear my husband's cold eyes, and since I've burned that shadow powder in their circle, I'm beginning to take control of him. They say that the scent will guide his dreams. This is not a single event, but a counteroffensive of female energy that is spreading quietly in the court, in the family, and in the parliament." In the highly patriarchal imperial system of Rome, the cloister of Venefica was perhaps the only space where women could use their invisible power to gain influence. In 31 BC, Octavian issued a moral revival decree restricting the use of foreign spices by women for self-compatibility. Nero ordered the burning of many marketplaces and raided nocturnal incense. In 104 AD, Emperor Tulligen wrote in a letter to the viceroy, "If any man should again practice magic by odor, he shall be tried for plotting against the empire." These are not about poisons, but about incense, about the woman's ability to control others with incense, the ability of a woman to control others with her fragrance. Because of this, Venefica has not disappeared since then, but has quietly hidden, fractured, and flowed into several systems: monastic incense, burning chambers, alchemist schools of aromatherapy. Even witch oil and night vapors were frequently mentioned in the medieval witch trials. If we look back at the world today, we see that these techniques never really died out. High-end perfume brands are engaging in mood-inducing scent marketing. Some psychological laboratories are studying how scent can affect people's sense of trust. There are even references to scent formulas used to interfere with enemy judgment in documents from specific military agencies. Does this mean that Venefica's legacy is still alive? In the next chapter, we will unravel the final mystery. Does the hidden coding structure of these powders suggest that they are not witchcraft, but rather an early model of psychological engineering? We used to think that Venefica's poisoned shadow was just a folk magic, a witchcraft ritual, or the ancient cleverness of women manipulating others with incense. But looking back from today's perspective, its structure, techniques, and psychological pathways are far more complex than they appear. We attempted a matrix disassembly of the 7 documented recipes. Each fragrance contains a 3-tiered structure of main note trigger medium. Each formula needs to be paired with a time element, e.g., phases of the moon, moments of incense burning. Each purpose of use is centered around 3 core effects: trust disintegration, emotional pull, and decision interference. Aren't these, in fact, the basic elements of contemporary? Cut to a modern military document, Psychological Operations Strategy Chart. Reconstructed in modern terms, Poison Shadows has the following psychological engineering modules: sensory priming, emotional anchoring, binding odors to specific emotional states, creating path dependencies, trust bridge. The aroma, when repeated, induces the brain to secrete signaling peptides that cause the target to drop its guard. Cognitive dissonance dampening, CDD. Triggers judgmental ambiguity and psychological affiliation through alternating pleasure xiao. Anxiety. Is it really magic? Or is it an as-yet unnamed, pre-scientific psychological intervention system? What is even more alarming is the frequency of numerical ratios and geometrical structures. In a page break known as the Book of Night Incense, the following ratio for making incense is labeled ambergris 1, mandarin 3, poppy 4, wood resin 2, burned on a 7-day wheel 5 times. It's not just an instruction manual. It's more like an algorithm, like program code, that follows a precise order and drives the human mental system to run offsets. In 1978, the French International Institute of Odor and Behavior, IIOB, first proposed the odor programming hypothesis. Certain composite odor combinations can trigger the activation of established cognitive circuits in the brain, acting as a scent code to unlock certain memories and emotional pathways. And did the Roman witches have already mastered these unscientifically named psychological buttons? Perhaps the poison shadows were not an isolated historical phenomenon. It doesn't have a microscope, it doesn't have a data model, but it has intuition, repetitive trials, generational transmission, and cultural cover. It manipulates not bodies, but decisions. Do you remember him? The patriarch who died silently in the mist of incense? Perhaps he didn't die of poisoning, but rather chose to give up resisting, because his consciousness, at that moment, had long since ceased to be his own. Today, we use technology to lift the fog of this ancient art. But have you ever wondered if the perfumes, scent marketing, anxiety fragrances, and hypnotic oils we use every day, is Venefica really buried in history? Or are they just a different era, a different name, continuing to stand unseen by us and manipulate our hearts? If you also want to know more about the ancient hidden secrets of control and psychological warfare, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments section. Do you believe that odors really do influence people's moods and decisions? Have you ever experienced this? Please like, retweet, and add your favorite smell it friend. Our next installment will continue to uncover another forgotten dark archive.